and he just doesn't want to say it.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
Well, this is great. We're so glad to have you here. Can everybody hear Dr. Danko okay? Thumbs up?
Yeah. Is it okay?
Good, good. You're going to love the content he has here. And should we get started here, James?
Yeah, it's time. Let's do it. It's
Yeah.
401.
Well, first of all, this is James Roberts. He's the head of the Lehigh, the elite team here at Security Home Mortgage, and just a thrill to be working with
Hello
such a
there.
rock star. And we like to do things big and right and often. And so we thought,
That's-
what a great way to start off 2022. Then with the millionaire next door, Dr. Bill Danko. As you guys can see, he's in upstate New York, joining us live and in person. And I've had the opportunity to travel with this man. I tell you, he is a wealth of knowledge. But to get to have you here, he's on the longest running bestsellers list of New York Times with his classic book, The Millionaire Next Door, that he and Dr. Stanley wrote together. And what an incredible staple that you should have in your book. If you're serious about retiring and being able to live that dream, Dr. Danko is going to tell you that the original name of his book was Big Hat, No Cattle, and he'll explain what that Texas term means to you. But we all want to be that millionaire next door. And on top of that, not only has he been super successful and the head of the marketing department at the State University of New York at Albany, but he's also a charitable man. Has taken great care of his brother throughout his whole life. And he'll talk a little bit about that and what it really means to be richer than a millionaire. So with that, my friends, let's give a big round of applause for the millionaire next door himself, Dr. Bill Danko. Yeah.
Thank you.
Woo!
What a great intro. That's great. Yeah, Nate, you and I go back at least 20 years, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
At least. So it's wonderful. But you know what? This is really what relationships are all about, as opposed to mere transactions. You know, let's go back to 1973. I was a mere student in what I thought was just going to be another ordinary marketing class with a young assistant professor, Thomas J. Stanley. It was a class on consumer behavior. I got an A in the class. We had a good relationship, and he invited me to be on his research team for his very first study of the affluent market. So this goes back 40 years, doesn't it? Well, during that time, from 1973 to 1993, a lot of things happened in both of our careers. He went off to teach at another school. He told me to go get a PhD, which I did, from the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI. And then I became a faculty member myself. But over that 20-year period, from 73 to 93, Tom and I did a whole bunch of research studies that not only for academic purposes, but also consulting. But when we get all this data and then we try to connect the dots, he had a really good insight in 1993 when he called me up and said, Bill, let's do a project which we'll call Big Hat, No Cattle. And I said, well, what do you mean big hat, no cattle? And it became clear when we started looking at the data again. The problem was there's a lot of folks who look like they have. Is the sound okay over there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Make sure
Okay.
everybody's muted.
Everybody
Okay.
mute yourselves real fast.
Okay. This big hat, no cattle concept is that there's a lot of people who have the illusion of wealth. They have the fancy cars, the fancy clothes, the fancy house, but they have a wall-to-wall mortgage. They have student loans. They have car loans. I mean, they're in debt up to their eyeballs, but they look good, don't they? So what do you want to do? Do you want to look good or do you want to be wealthy? Now, it's fun to look good. I'm not denying that it's not wonderful to have some personal dignity, but what about sustainability? That's the issue here, sustainability. How much debt can you take on and keep on this economic treadmill? It's really going to be quite devastating. Well, so in 1993, we put the new research together, looking at all of our old data sets. and came out with what, of course, is now, as you know, The Millionaire Next Door. So this book came out in 1996. New York Times bestseller for 3 consecutive years, which was nice, paid a lot of royalties, kept me in a lifestyle. And but it was a research project, though, that was destined to be successful. Now, why do I say that? Am I being boastful? Look, I taught marketing research for 35 years at the university. And one of the things I told my students, and what is good about solid research, is when you have something called convergent validity. It's when you have your paper and pencil questionnaires, you have your focus groups, you have your personal interviews, you have syndicated data, you have IRS data and Census Bureau data. When you have all of these divergent data sets and they all converge on the basic truths that we reveal in The Millionaire Next Door, it's hard to refute the findings. There's really solid evidence that this is how millionaires become millionaires. Now you say, well, why don't I just go play for the NFL or something? Or why don't I play pro basketball? Or why don't I invent something in Silicon Valley? Well, you can, and that's a way of doing it. But you know, the odds of doing it are pretty slim. The odds of getting a bestseller are pretty slim too. But how you build that foundation is really critical. And when you have the research, it's easy to talk about the truths that are in the book. Now, because of this success, it certainly changed, our lives in so many positive ways. Because money allows you to do things on your own terms, of course. But one of the things that, I hear in popular culture is this concept called FIRE, financial independence, retire early. Well, look, I'm not retired, but I have financial independence. I don't understand why anybody would want to retire if they love what they're doing. Okay. Now, there are certain things you just have to retire on. I mean, a surgeon really can't do work much beyond the age of 60. 55 is probably preferable for their retirement target, right? But when you're in the speaking business, the performing business, the education business, there's really no need to say, now I'm going to retire. Airline pilots have to retire at 65, okay? But if you really love what you're doing, and it's kind of hard to be a pilot without an airplane, so unless you're a consultant to the airlines, there comes a time when you say, I must retire, but this idea of retire early is just a foreign concept to me. It's, I just find it aberrant. Another concept that I find aberrant, and I've seen this because I talked to a real estate group that really was into something called fake it till you make it. Well, how disingenuous is that? I find that abhorrent as well. The whole idea in the substance that I want to talk about is based on relationship building, having some substance, as opposed to being in a mere transactional situation. When you're merely transacting, you have nothing that you're building on. What you have is just a series of transactions that may all be profitable, but what do you do for an encore? You're always on that economic treadmill. So what we must do is understand, how did these wealth builders do it? What were the building blocks that they used? Well, the number one building block is frugality. What does this mean in practical terms? It doesn't mean you have to live like a pauper, but what it means is you have to practice something called self-imposed economic scarcity. Self-imposed economic scarcity is what's between your ears, not what the Joneses are doing, not who you have to keep up with and impress, but saying, what kind of lifestyle can I sustain and be comfortable with? What's good for my family? What's good for me? So what does this mean in practical terms? Well, whatever you make, live on 80% of it and systematically save 20%. So you work, you save, and then with those savings, you have long-term investments. So how do you become frugal in a very practical sense? Well, I reflect on one physician I interviewed who really liked to buy and drive Mercedes-Benz cars. But he said, Bill, the trick is I buy cars that are 2 to 3 years old. I'm going to let somebody give me the gift of early depreciation. Doesn't that make sense? You can get over the concept of having a new car smell, can't you? Let somebody else pay for that. You still have a quality car, but at the same time, you're not paying that inflated price right out of the showroom. Or what's wrong with buying your clothes right off the rack? I have a few custom-made suits, but I went to Taiwan to get them when I was doing some seminars, and they're great. But my point is, buying suits off the rack are just as great. Nobody can tell the difference when they're several feet away from you, especially in the social distancing that we're now all practicing. Okay. All right. You always have to think about the time value of money. Say, why spend $1,000 or $2,000 on clothing when $500 will suffice? Why not take, and I like Armani too. I understand there's a real allure there. I see a note here on the screen, but that $1,500 difference, why not invest it in some sort of productive asset? In fact, it was 1985 when Franco Modigliani, a Nobel laureate in economics, won his prize for the life cycle of money theory. And what this means in very practical terms is when you're young, you work for money, and when you're old, money works for you. What a concept, huh? Well, how could you have money work for you if you're not frugal and a saver and a long-term investor? So it makes a lot of sense to have these building blocks. And so what we have found that for every wealthy person who buys one of these high-end items, such as, well, the Armani suits, the brand new Mercedes or some other high-end item, there are 4 to 5 other folks buying that same item who can't afford it, but they want to look wealthy. Well, my friends, you have a choice. You can look wealthy or you can be wealthy. And when I talk to my friends in law enforcement, one of the things they remind me of when I ask the question, what do you have to do to avoid being victimized? And again, this officer told me, keep a low profile. Well, if you have all the bling and the flashy car and everything else, and you're a bad guy or a bad woman who wants to victimize you, who are you going to victimize? Somebody who looks wealthy or somebody who's driving ordinary cars, lives in an ordinary neighborhood, but has a very solid net worth that nobody knows about? Doesn't it make sense? Why be boastful of your riches when you're just going to attract perhaps the criminal element? And of course, we see documentation of this. Even Warren Buffett years ago was victimized by some bad guys. He survived, obviously, but when you're very wealthy, you're a target, and a huge target at that. So this idea of frugality and starting early, looking at the theorem from Professor Franco Modigliani of the life cycle of money, are some really necessary building blocks for your wealth development. We also have to avoid excessive debt. Now, there's good debt and there's bad debt. Look, I happen to think that reasonable mortgages are good debt, quite frankly. But what happens when you have a mortgage that is sold to somebody and somehow they're thought to be creditworthy and things get upside down? There's a world of hurt all around. I mean, banks don't want to foreclose, but they will. It just becomes very ugly. What's wrong with having affordability and a reasonable mortgage? Now, I say this in the context of, in the biblical book of Proverbs, chapter 22, verse 7, there's a really useful line for you to consider. That line is, the borrower is a slave to the lender. When you have a reasonable mortgage, at least you'll get out of jail at a certain time, right? That debtor's jail. But what happens when you're overextended and have these student loans, car loans, mortgages? It becomes very difficult. In fact, what we know, when we look at the very wealthy who have to file estate tax returns with the Internal Revenue Service, we know that at the time of death for these high net worth individuals, their typical debt load is about 12% of their total net worth. In other words, the debt to asset ratio. They have a very modest amount of debt. Now, that data is from a few years ago for the Internal Revenue Service. But now that we've been in this environment of practically 0% interest, one of the phenomena that has been occurring is these wealthy people are using their assets as collateral to get these, 1% loans, having a lifestyle that's large, and then not worrying about it, knowing that the collateral will take care of it. Well, that's a new phenomena. I think it's a bit risky, but nevertheless, that's something that has been occurring lately. But how long will that party last? I couldn't tell you. But I think things will be tightening up in the coming years. They have to. I hope they do. Okay. Another thing we know that with so many of these affluent people, in the appendix of this book, we have a litany. It's appendix 3 in the Millionaire Next Door of wealth builders who had multiple streams of income. And there's some very notable examples. I mean, if you read the Wall Street Journal, for example, every Saturday, they have some pretty interesting human interest obituaries about people who have, made it big in business, made a lot of money, were charitable at that as well. But it gives you a glimpse as to what their priorities were during their lifetime. But let me give you a couple of examples that really highlight what I want to get you to know. Mary Higgins Clark, a fiction writer, died last year or 2 years ago. And she had over 50 books to her credit. She sold over 100 million copies in her lifetime. She became very wealthy. But how did she get into writing? Well, years ago, I had dinner at a writer's house. Joe Persico, he writes history books. And he had a sign on his, or a picture in his office. And he said, writing is nothing more than putting one word after another. And he also said, you can't revise a blank page. You have to do something. Look at it, let it age, revise it, improve it. Well, Mary Higgins Clark became a widow in her 30s with 5 young children. And she said, how am I going to support my kids? I know how to write poetry. I know how to write some prose. And so she had the discipline of getting up at 5 a.m. every day from 5 to 7 a.m., sitting down, writing, something and then getting your kids off to school later in the morning. The first book she wrote flopped. She was disappointed. It was about American presidents. Good topic, but not really her thing. Her second book, she got a $3,000 advance. Sounds good. And it is good because most books get no advances whatsoever. Just to keep this in perspective, with Millionaire Next Door, we were rejected more than 20 times before Longstreet Press gave us an advance of $50,000. And that was just enough to cover our research costs that we had out of pocket. So, it's good to have that underwriting for sure. But okay, getting back to Mary Higgins Clark. She then continued to write, and her third book finally, when it went to paperback, got $1 million advance. The rest is history. But what Mary Higgins Clark demonstrates is that when you have a real obligation to feed 5 hungry kids and take care of them the way every mother should, she knew that she could take her skill and use her perseverance and write and write and write. And she just focused on something that was so natural to her. But here's another example of somebody who's not so much of a writer. Wayne Hughes. He also died last year. He died with a net worth of over $4 billion. Well, what did he do? He had an undergraduate degree from the University of Southern California in 1957. When he and a bud were riding around Southern California, and he noticed all the junk and clutter people collect. And he said, they need a place to store this stuff. And he said, I'm going to build storage units. And he built thousands of them. But in his obituary, he is quoted as saying, well, before he died, obviously, he says, the secret to building wealth was 1 unit at a time. He says, these storage units, you don't have to worry about carpeting or toilets or plumbing. You collect rents. And if people don't pay their rent, you seize their goods, have an auction. There's a lot of attraction there. And in fact, one of my friends I happen to know, his net worth is close to $20 million. He just retired from his full-time practice. And I asked him what he is going to do now. He says, I'm buying into storage units. This guy is no dummy. I've seen his property where he's getting these built. And he says they're already booked. It's a good model. Okay, look, I don't know what your particular talents or interests are, whether you want to do storage units, but what each of these individuals do, like the Mary Higgins Clark, who had a need to feed her family. Wayne Hughes said, I know how to solve this problem of junk that Americans have. Why not, and another one that I'm attracted to is actually trailer parks. I know a fellow who owns 2 trailer parks. He's an engineer by day, and he manages the trailer parks. And he said, it's a beautiful model. I have a piece of developed land with utilities on it. People with their trailer that they own themselves need a place to park it. I'm able to collect rents. And if they don't collect their rent, they don't pay their rents, their house is on wheels. It's easy enough to evict them. Not that we want to evict anybody, but the point is, he looks at it in terms of a business context. It's easier to get the job done than owning a lot of, fixed apartments that, have all sorts of problems during this pandemic. Okay, but you get the idea here. So these are some of the traits that are outlined in building wealth. Having the multiple streams of income, finding a niche and solving a problem, being frugal, avoiding excessive debt. I mean, these are truly tried and true ways of building wealth. But we also, in the book, in The Millionaire Next Door, examine how corrosive can money be within the family. If you've ever seen how certain estates have been settled with the siblings and children thinking they're getting disenfranchised, not getting what they think is due to them. Well, this is obviously a very difficult and ugly situation for anybody to be in. But one of the chapters we have in The Millionaire Next Door is about economic outpatient care, EOC, about what does it mean for a parent to subsidize an adult child? What happens when that allowance never ends? There becomes a sense of entitlement. And one of the graphics we have in the book is we look at the amount of money the inheritor versus the earner spends on all sorts of items: housing, cars, clothing, jewelry, vacations, and using what is called the t-test for two independent groups, asking the question, is there a difference in consumption between those who inherit money versus those who earn the money? And what do you think we found? A huge statistical difference. The inheritors tend to have the attitude, easy come, easy go. The earners, on the other hand, really take it seriously, saying, wait a minute, I earned this. I have this idea and mentality of frugality. Why would I want to be, so profligate in my spending? This is my money. I'm taking it seriously. I have to be a good steward of it. And so this idea of economic outpatient care is something that really becomes a hot button topic. A number of years ago, I was on the West Coast with a money management group. It was a luncheon, and it was the parents who were very successful brought their teenage children to this luncheon. And the topic they wanted to hear about was economic outpatient care. The parents loved it. The children hated it. That's just life. But that's the reality. We have to understand. In fact, Warren Buffett, I think, said it best about, well, sir, you're a billionaire. I mean, and he's taking care of his children. And in fact, Bill Gates, I remember in a magazine interview, was with Forbes magazine, he was asked how much money his kids were going to get. And he said, just $10 million each. I don't want to spoil them. And I could see that when you're the billionaire and 10 million is, pocket change. But Warren Buffett said, give your children enough so that they can do anything, but not so much they can do nothing. Because no parent, I have 3 kids, 5 grandkids, and so far so good. Everybody is gainfully employed, at least the adult kids are. The grandkids are, the oldest is 15. But my point is this: we have to start encouraging responsible behavior at the very youngest of ages, that's for sure. So we know that inheritors spend more, and those who get large gifts tend to have deadened talents. It's a reality. But you might say, well, I'm the exception, right? You can tell yourself anything you want, but that's the reality of how it works here. Okay, The Millionaire Next Door, again, 3 years, and it's still selling, 4 million copies to date. I mean, huge success, long-term lessons. It's wonderful. But in 1996, when the book came out, my mother had a major stroke. And well, why am I telling you this? Because she was the primary caregiver to my quadriplegic brother. And so things changed dramatically in my life. I mean, yes, I was on the speaking circuit, and yeah, it was great being on the road. Still had my university obligations. Um, it truly was a wonderful career, and is a wonderful career. I've since left the university because, well, you know, there's more to life than just being in 15-week intervals with a group of students who are young enough to be my grandchildren almost. It's sometimes you say, okay, I want to do the research, but I don't really want to do the teaching in that sense anymore. So Zooming is now the new forum that I prefer in getting the message out. And it's worldwide, obviously, and it's working out quite nicely. But when I became the primary caregiver to my brother, along with my wife, we said, look, we got to keep him out of a nursing home. We bought him a house, all wheelchair accessible. And it's so hard to get healthcare aids. It's even more difficult nowadays. But my point is, I was his personal healthcare aide every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for 20 years. And you get to reflect on life when you're dealing with somebody you can't even scratch his nose. And here I am, the bon vivant, and all the things you know about me so far. But here's a guy you can't do anything. You have to feed him, bathe him, dress him, and you do it, and you do it. And you get to reflect on things. And this is where how the Richer Than a Millionaire came about with my colleague, Rich Van Ness. He lives about 20 miles north of me here in upstate New York. And we'd get together socially and talk about life. He was in the Marine Corps and, has a lot of good, solid, disciplined values. And he's also an academic. And we talked about what lessons do we want to give our children and our grandchildren, and indeed the thousands, tens of thousands of students we have taught in the college and university level. And that's how the book came about, saying, money's good, but money and happiness is really better. Now, how do we go about measuring this? Just like any research project, we say we need some more survey research, right? And so we're going to record things such as income and net worth. And at the time when we were doing the research, the median net worth in the United States was about $100,000 per household. Right now, it's about $120,000. But it's a very modest amount of net worth. And most of that net worth of the 100,000 in most households is on their home equity, right? But we also, of course, look at their savings and investments and everything else that goes into their net worth calculation. And so we automatically eliminated everybody below the median, because when you have less than 100,000, you have other things on your mind, like, am I going to be able to, survive in an urban environment and, and do all the, look, if you had under 100,000 and were in Manhattan, New York City, you're in poverty, okay? And that's a pretty extreme example. San Francisco has similar issues, of course. But my point is, we just looked at those between 100,000 and above. Now, 100,000 to 1 million, you're doing pretty well. $1 million, you're in the top 15% of the net worth distribution. To be a 1%er, the defiled 1%ers, the minimum amount of net worth you need is about $11 million. Then, of course, there is no upper limit. My goodness, what does Jeff Bezos have? I mean, billions. I mean, it just gets astronomical. And, the old story, Jeff Bezos walks into a bar and on average, everybody becomes a billionaire. All right. You can't use averages. with this kind of research. You got to look at the median. So we're looking at those above the median, those who are not hard scrabble, those who can actually have some positive direction in their life if they choose. Well, how do we know what positive is? We turn to the psychology literature. Ed Diener, a professor of psychology and sociology, in fact, he just died a couple of months ago. What a loss to the trade. I really admired his work. And one of the things he put into the public domain was a scale that we use extensively in Richer Than a Millionaire called SWB, Subjective Well-Being. It's a scale, and you can do your own assessment, but if you score low on this scale, based on the statements you have to respond to, you tend to be considered disgruntled or unhappy with life. And if you score high on the scale, you tend to be considered to be a well-adjusted, integrated, well, happy person. So the idea here, just like we did in The Millionaire Next Door, we looked at under-accumulators and prodigious accumulators of wealth. We do the same kind of methodology in Richer Than a Millionaire. We look at those folks who are disgruntled, which fortunately is only about 15% of the population. And the other 85%, irrespective of whether they're near millionaires or actual well-off millionaires, high net worth individuals, about 85% or so are considered well-adjusted. So how do they differ from each other? Well, we look at this idea of what's expected of each of us. What does the psychology literature tell us? What do the great religions tell us? I mean, when we look at Judaism and we ask ourselves, what makes a good Jew? And look at the book of Isaiah, and it's about being charitable. How do you justify yourself? You give your coat to those who have no coat. You give drink to the thirsty. You feed the hungry. You visit the prisoners. Well, that's pretty good stuff in my view. It becomes a way of life of what's expected. It's all of a sudden, it's not about you and your selfishness, but it's about being outward and being a giver of your resources. Give to those who do not have. In fact, it was Ben Franklin in his essay called The Way to Wealth, written in 1758, said to be truly wealthy, yeah, it's good to have frugality and prudence and industriousness, all the things that Franklin talked about, and all the things we talked about in Millionaire Next Door. But you got to understand, you must also have the idea of being a charitable person. And so Franklin, from a secular perspective, said to be happy and to be truly wealthy, you must be a giver. In Judaism, Isaiah says you must be a giver. In Christianity, Matthew 25. In fact, this is on when Mother Teresa's fundraising letters always had the quote from Matthew 25. That which you've done to the least of these, you've done unto me, says the Lord. Okay? In Islam, one of the pillars of Islam is being charitable. Okay? So we have Franklin and his secular approach. We have the great religions and saying, this is what it means to be integrated in society and what your obligation as a human being is. So what did we find? When we looked at things like how much do you give to charity? How much time do you volunteer? Do you practice the golden rule, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you? Are you at peace with your soul? And that's priceless right there, knowing that you've done what you could do to help others in need. I mean, I would not be at peace with my soul if I did not help my brother. I, I don't know how I could live with myself. He died in 2015. And of course, Richer Than a Millionaire came out in 2017. But I didn't have the time to really finish the book until, the time was given to me because my obligation had been completed. But trust me, you'll never run out of opportunities to serve others. There's, helping your family is absolutely imperative, but there's a whole other group that can be served as well, and you'll never run out of opportunities. So what did we find? Those who are not only wealthy in terms of financial net worth, but also scored very high on this subjective well-being test, those who were happy did follow the golden rule, did volunteer more time, we show that statistically, did give more money to charity, were at peace with their soul. I mean, it sounds almost like a prescription for, what do you have to do to lead a good life? This is so rooted not only in religion and secular humanism, but also what makes you feel good as an individual. It's an obligation to be an integrated human being. In fact, if I could share this with you from Richer Than a Millionaire, it's on page 136. I have a quote here from Viktor Frankl, Frankl. He's an Auschwitz survivor, and he was a psychiatrist who died just maybe 20 years ago. But he said, how do certain people survive in such an adverse condition, such as, well, a concentration camp? And he took the lessons from Auschwitz and he brought it into his practice about what makes people happy in their search for meaning in life. Now, let me give you a quote from his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He says, don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you are going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued, it must ensue. And it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself. Man, Frankl nailed it. From a psychiatric point of view, he says, you must have a purpose greater than yourself. Well, your family. Look, making a living is good, but why are you making that living? To buy a new Mercedes? That's not the point. Yeah, to how can you become more integrated and a giver in society? So that's how Richer Than a Millionaire differs from Millionaire Next Door. Millionaire Next Door is great in terms of laying the framework for this is what you have to do to become wealthy in a financial sense. But Richer Than a Millionaire, take that money and use it for a purpose greater than yourself, okay? So, but once you build this net worth, and as I said, you're going to become a target, and we live in a litigious society, don't we? I can't emphasize enough good legal structures. I have a number of investment properties. They're as individual limited liability companies that are then held within a limited partnership. Those are what I call my risky assets. And I have another limited partnership that just holds my financial interests, which, are, other than making dumb mistakes where I take risks and making investment decisions. But it's those are pretty safe assets, and they're growing over time. But my point is, since we have this problem in society, it's a natural problem. The haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots want what the haves have. And this idea of accumulating more wealth for yourself is counter to being happy. Okay. But being that giver and having a reasonably good lifestyle is priceless. It gives you that peace of mind. That's for sure. Peace of soul, right? And I certainly want peace of soul and be well integrated and serve others. But now that I've given you what I think are really the fundamental truths here on wealth building and true wealth, true prosperity, there's a problem that was really nicely summarized by Benjamin Franklin in his Way to Wealth essay from 1758. In the concluding paragraph, he said, "The people heard the message about wealth building, agreed with it, and then practiced the contrary." Why is that? Change is hard. It's hard to get out of your comfort zone. Don't want to dwell on this, but I come from a pretty modest background, and I knew that if I didn't study hard and and in this case become a professor, and the only reason that I stayed in school, my widowed mother said, "Bill, stay in school." And that's probably the best advice she ever gave. My dad died when I was 5 years old, and he was 38. And that's when I realized we're just as St. James in the book of James in the Bible says, we are just a puff of smoke. We're just dissipating. I'm not a nihilist. I love life. I love my family. But what I'm saying is sometimes people take what they do for a living too seriously, thinking this is who they are. Who they really are should be givers within the society that they live. Givers instead of takers. That's right. That's it's as simple as that.
Dr. Danko,
Frank,
this is awesome. And you know what? We got about 12 minutes left.
Yeah.
And I know we want to respect your time. I wanted to give people that are on this call the opportunity perhaps to ask you a quick question. Would you be okay for a little Q&A for the next 10 minutes?
Yeah. So I'm pretty much concluded here. So let's do that. I hope the message is well received here. I put somebody to sleep back there.
Thomas, come up here, bud. Okay, we got our first question right here. Go ahead. Yep.
What'd be the first step of, like getting out of your comfort zone?
What's the first step?
Yeah.
One of the things, I'm, relatively in good shape, but being in a comfort zone, I was told years ago by a gym teacher, look, I can't do those push-ups for you. You just got to do it yourself. And that, I think, is a really great example. It's so easy to say, well, I'll start tomorrow. The same thing with Mary Higgins Clark. She had no choice with 5 kids. I got to do something. And it means getting up at 5 a.m., sitting down and writing. When I look at, again, some of my writing friends that I respect, especially Joe Persico, the historian, he says, you just got to sit down, write. You can't revise a blank page. So what I'm saying is it's personal discipline that has to be brought into play here. Not only, I talked about the discipline of having legal structures, for example, protecting your wealth, but what about your personal habits that are so critical? I mean, I was watching a program on public television the other night about earthquakes in San Francisco. Now, I think San Francisco is a wonderful town. I got friends there. I like to visit there. Most parts of San Francisco, anyway, I like to be in. But they're on a fault line. Who in their right mind wants to build their castle on a fault line? I have friends in Miami Beach, and we have, coastal erosion and rising tides. and those coastal lands that they say, but it's so nice to be on the coastal area of the ocean. And I get it, but it's not a very permanent solution. I mean, nothing is permanent in this world. You get that? But once you set your dream of saying, okay, this is what I want to accomplish, you know, what is good? I forgot the name of the book, but do a Google search on military strategy taught at West Point. And you'll find that the number one consideration for any military campaign that's going to cause life and limb and money, the number one determinant is called the principle of the objective, where you ask yourself, why am I engaging in this activity? And once you know the why, I want to be an athlete, therefore I better start working out. Therefore, even if it's raining, I got to do my run, no matter what. If my objective is to become the athlete, this is what you got to do. And likewise, if you want to be a wealth builder, frugality is what you got to do. You got to get rid of this notion of what your neighbors are doing. And you got to say, this is the lifestyle I want to build and one that I can afford. And you do that saying, that's my objective. So that's really critical here. How do you do it? You know, it's like going on a diet, isn't it? You know, you could read about it all you want, but until you actually do it, nothing's going to happen. Right? So, got to have that principle of the objective. Yeah, I should probably look into that more myself in terms of strategy. But that's, again, it's the West Point way. And our West Point Army has been pretty successful over the years. So, principle of the objective before you commit resources. Ask yourself, you know what, Zig Ziglar, you ever hear of him? He's considered one of the best salesmen who ever lived. He has one of the phrases in his books called, I think it's from See You at the Top. And he says, when you're setting your goals, be careful which wall you lean your ladder next to. Because when you get to the top, you better be at the right place. You know, because they're just so many careers. I mean, of course, we're talking about real estate here and banking and mortgages, you know, well, you got to ask yourself that question too. Is this particular activity something that I can really grow into? I mean, for example, what I have friends in the insurance industry, and a lot of my students at the university got recruited by insurance companies. And most of those students got washed out within 3 years, saying, you know, they just did not have the discipline, the will to create a good book for clients in the insurance industry. However, there are some folks in the insurance industry who made a career out of it for 40 years and became super wealthy, super philanthropic, really nice people. It's a very nice industry to be in. But you can tell if you got washed out within the first 3 years, that's it. That industry was not for you. And the same thing is true in real estate, I suspect. And mortgage brokers. I mean, it's just a fact of life. Same thing is true in academia. Now you have 6 years to get tenure at the university. When that committee says, oh, at year 5, I don't think you're going to make it. Yeah, you must work harder or find a school where you will make it in. Okay. So I hope that gave you some insight.
Thank you.
That was great. Does anybody else have a question they'd like to ask?
Yeah, there's a question in the chat.
By Nelson?
Mm-hmm.
He says, can you address what long-term investments you are referring to, real estate, Roth versus traditional IRA, stocks, crypto, etc.? What is your favorite?
Okay. First of all, I don't do crypto. I don't understand it. you know, I just don't understand it, period. And there are some banks that are investing in it, at least part of their portfolio, but I'm not. I might buy some Coinbase. That's, the administrative end of crypto, but I don't have that either. Okay, look, when I look at what I consider, let me show you something here. Let me get it. Wait, let me get it off my bookshelf here. Hold on 1 second. All right. The book, A Random Walk Down Wall Street by Professor Burton McHale. This is an older edition, but it's he's a professor of economics at Princeton, and he leads you through a life cycle. When you're in your 20s, how should you be investing? When you're in your 60s, how should you be investing? So it's going to change over time, but I do believe, real estate, has been good to me. What can I say? I am an investor in real estate. I have 4 properties, but also equities are very good. And especially index funds with, I'll tell you, Vanguard index funds. They're low cost, don't have a lot of administrative fees. I think Fidelity is good, but I don't do Fidelity. But my point is, some bread and butter. In fact, what Professor McHale says in an earlier edition, he says he used to be a real proponent of the S&P 500. Now, because it is so overweighted with Apple and a few others that are just so distorting everything within the index, he says you're much better off with the Wilshire 5000, the total stock market index. And quite frankly, I don't own the S&P 500. I own the Wilshire 5000. It's, it's the top 5,000 companies. All right. And then there's an international fund from Vanguard. And there's also a real estate fund. The real estate fund for Vanguard, the Real Estate Investment Trust, check it out. I think it was up 29% in 2022. Or 2021. You talk about, a no risk or low risk investment of saying, I don't have to worry about evicting anybody or worry about, shopping centers going out of business or hospitals, getting shut down or whatever. These professionals at Vanguard own, the buildings and collect the rents. And if you can get a 29% return, which is, I consider very nice, it's without doing a lot of heavy lifting. So yeah, there are some very solid things you can do. But the key is to start young, keep it in there, don't start invading it for purposes other than what your purpose is. And what is that purpose? Is it to fund college, for your kids? Is it to, whatever? Or is it just to retire on your own? One day, even I will retire. But I'm still into it. Okay. Does that satisfy? So I don't do crypto. I'm bread and butter. And long-term horizon, and that's the key. Look, I'm almost 70. I didn't start seriously investing until I was about 30 because I finished my PhD when I was 29, and I just didn't. I was a graduate student for a long time. So, but over these past 40 years, the market has been very good to me. What can I tell you? It's good.
That's great. Does anybody have any more questions? We're kind of right towards the end of it's 5 o'clock here now, 7 o'clock your time, Dr. Danko.
Yeah, that's
You're a rock
right.
star. Thank you for giving us an hour of your time.
I
This
hope
has been huge. If you guys enjoyed, let's just give a big round of applause.
Yay.
We really want to thank you, Dr. Danko. And
Thank
do
you.
you have any last words before we hang up here?
Yeah. No, you know what? I thank you for giving me the time because I can't do it without an audience, you know. I'm just talking into my microphone and screen right here, but I know there's a lot of good people out there who are appreciating the message, because you know what, no, it's a message that's tried and true, and I do hope you internalize it. I'm not selling any products, what I'm selling is ideas, and I look at this as what's the advice I have given my students at the university, the advice I have given my own children, and now what I'm giving my grandchildren. So if I can touch your life, I mean, look, I get fan mail still from my students saying, remember that time in 1982 when you were in the lecture center and you said this? I said, well, I probably said something like that. Well, you encouraged me. I like getting fan mail like that. It's absolutely wonderful.
Well,
It's
thank you
good.
for encouraging us here tonight, and
Yeah,
definitely taking a lot from this. And we want to just
Thank
one
you,
more
thank
time
you.
thank you.
good. I
So,
thank you. And we'll keep in touch. Nate is on the A team here, He's
the elite team.
the elite team. And
That's right.
I appreciate you buying some books, and we'll endorse them as necessary, and we'll bring it to the next level.
Well,
All right.
thank you very much for your time. The Millionaire Next Door, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Let's give it
Thank
up
you.
for the Millionaire
Perfect.
Next Door.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If all,
Thank you.
Danko.
if all
Thank
our
you
loan
all.
officers can stay on after this, after everyone's done.
Okay.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Dr. Danko.
Take care
Thank
now.
you.
Thank you. Bye
See you,
bye now.
brother.
Take care, bro.
It was good. I enjoyed that. So Brett's gonna take a couple minutes, guys.
Yeah,
Okay.
just super duper quick. I won't keep you very long. This is just for loan officers here at Security Home Mortgage. Anybody else, you're welcome to drop off. It's over. I just wanted to let you know the books that we're going to be giving out. We've talked a lot this last little while about blue fishing. What a great opportunity to go give a book, to have a reason to then follow up, to ask how the book went, read it yourselves. We've been talking about that. I'm in charge of that this year to kind of push that. So that's really it. Just don't let that great opportunity go to waste, because nothing's better than having a reason to follow up. And you've got two right now, one to deliver a book, one to follow up sometime later and ask how they liked the book. So that's all.
Great.
Thank you so much, Brett. Everybody, thank you. Have a good one. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for making this happen.
Gotcha.